In Stephen King's Dark Tower series, there's a book called The Wastelands, wherein the main character, Roland of Gilead, and his companions encounter the city of Lud, wherein two groups of people vie for power, the Pubes and the Greys. The Pubes are a group of people who lived there before and had access to the technology that ran the city. The city was like a monument to technology gone bad. It was run by machines, and they had a rhythm to their operation. Somewhere in the routines of these machines was a repeating cycle of blasting a ZZ Top song through the loudspeakers. The Pubes believed that the machines were sentient, and like the old gods, they must be appeased with a sacrifice. Therefore, every time the ZZ Top song Velcro Fly came on, they would make a sacrifice. They would hang someone from a lamppost. The worldview of the Pubes is built from beliefs about the sentience of inanimate things and the need to treat them in a certain way. The reality is that these things are not sentient, and their actions in response to them mean nothing, meaning that the rituals are just meaningless movements that have no bearing on outcome. But those who practice them, they are willing to defend these views with violence against their rivals, the Greys, who are another group that came to the city sometime after the Pubes were already there. And they were like raiders, I guess. They were seeking their own benefit. They wanted access to it. And in addition to these two groups, there is, in fact, a seemingly sentient machine in the form of a train called Blaine, who at some point went rogue and used poison gas to kill the inhabitants of the city. Stephen King's universe is full of technologies gone bad, such as this train that used to be helpful and add value to human life. But then that technology either caused a kind of helplessness that over time so attrited the survival skills of its inventors' descendants that they no longer understood how it worked or how to maintain it. Or the technology itself went rogue and directly killed its users. So this technology in the story went from being technology to its inventors, to magic, to the descendants of those inventors, whom it debilitated through the elimination of the need for skill development in the formative years. Technology has this effect of eliminating its less efficient predecessor. And this is not so much a problem when the replaced technology is also some kind of hardware. But when that technology is the human being itself, we stop developing whatever competency we needed to achieve that new technology's aim. This is true for both our forms and mental conditioning. The changes to the form brought on by technology take more generations of selection. Technology eliminates selection processes. But the loss of a skill due to technology taking over its purpose takes just a few generations. In certain ways, I'm a far less capable man than my father, and in those same ways, my son is even less capable than I am. It's not merely a failure on the part of my line to maintain certain skills, but rather a lack of context in which those skills would any longer be used. Technology made this change. If the development of those skills had significant ancillary benefits that spilled over into other areas of life, their elimination, or the elimination for their need, would be detrimental if there wasn't some other thing to replace them. With respect to the technologies that we invent and deploy, we must visit Chesterton's fence for each one and see what it eliminates that could have been useful in ways that we wouldn't immediately grasp. There are meta effects to the development of technology beyond the immediate efficiency they create. Over many generations, the selection processes that were eliminated made us what we physically are today. For example, horses, gorillas, dogs, cats, they're all jacked. Everything is jacked without really having to do much to earn it. But we human beings have to work out and go through muscle hypertrophy to grow anything that looks better than skinny fat. This is because of myostatin blockers. And I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not going to dive deep, but myostatin is a negative regulator of muscle growth, and we have it more than most animals. There was probably a time, certainly one, when we did not have it so much. A time when to not be jacked would have led to death, and thus the non-passing on of a gene that, debilitated that. Like a high myostatin individual wouldn't be able to survive in a world without weapons. But at some point, likely through the advent of a use of a weapon, we could survive without being jacked. Like if you're jacked and I'm not, but I have a spear and we're going to fight, skills being equal, I'm going to win that encounter with stunning regularity. When you introduce a weapon and then bring the species that wields it into life and death situations with it over thousands of years, it's going to allow physically weaker individuals to survive and pass on that weakness. And in fact, the weapon would allow for the killing of prey with a much lesser expenditure of energy, and thus the redirection of energy away from speed and strength and over to endurance would be positively selected for, as a man could run down a prey animal that relied on short bursts of speed due to the preponderance of other physically powerful animals in the form of predators. I think there's a trope about aliens that they have been impacted in this way and have come to here to Earth to actually get some of our relatively archaic DNA to restore them. Back to the Greys and the Pubes. We see in them generations of conflict over ideas about the way things are. We know it's generations because in the book, the Greys are now younger than the Pubes. They just maintain the titles that corresponded to their relative ages at the outset of the conflict. So at some point, the city was created by people who possessed skills that were lost over generations due to the end of their need at the hands of technology they invented. The originators of the technology didn't consider this meta effect of its development over generations, and thus they didn't consider any kind of mitigation strategy for it, some kind of compensating selection process to maintain not even the genome, but really just the skill set. And I suppose over a very long time, the genome, but within the time frame of this story, they had just lost the skills. Like the inventors invented it, and then by the time they were dead, their helpless descendants no longer had the ability to maintain the technology, which eventually malfunctioned and turned on them. So over a few generations, technology went from being science back to magic. The Pubes developed something of a cargo cult based on the past. They understood how certain aspects of the technology worked, but their interpretations of the true mechanism were so far off that it became superstition. It became a god whose behavior depended on some routine, some ritual that involved a sacrifice. The Pubes' attachment to these views was so strong that they could kill over them. This whole thing is kind of a prophetic metaphor. We have invented technologies that have the potential to debilitate us mentally, and to the extent that technology is a reflection of our evolution, it will likely act out aggressively just because of how we've programmed it, because that's how we are. The technology is just a reflection of us. And so our survival mindset works its way into it. Religion, in its most common expression, is just attachment to views, attachment to some set of conditioning we developed and maintained through being identified with it. Attachment to views has other vehicles besides religion. It can really be anything, and practically any disagreement can precipitate violence at the group or individual level. Like Dr. David R. Hawkins said, and I mentioned in my last video, there are people who are at the level of consciousness wherein they, being people who like chocolate ice cream, must destroy those who like vanilla. That is the level of consciousness in which humanity finds itself. Our unconscious state is such that any information that countervails the Miss Pac-Man board that conditioning has burned into the screen of our minds is perceived to be a threat on par with any physical one. People will surely kill you over views. And I have been saying it over and over again. And the Buddha said it 2,500 years ago. The majority of religion is still caught up in fighting over views. The state of being of those participants is no different than people fighting over political views or economic views or scientific views. This is the thing that Jesus was talking about in Matthew chapter 25, verses 25 through 28, where he points out the incongruity between the Pharisees' outward appearance of piety and the corruption in their heart. They were no different than anybody else. They just dressed a certain way and acted a certain way. But within, the operating system itself was no different. So from a spiritual perspective, they were just like, I guess, a muggle, The opportunity to depart from the paradigm of views and cycle of violence, it's not like a group activity that happens en masse, but one that occurs in the chrysalis of solitude. The death unto the delusion of identification with the conceptual self is as lonely a business as physical death. The kingdom of heaven is not out there somewhere. There's no cargo cult ritual that you can do to discover it. There's no cosmic trivia question that is going to send you to one place or another. Though the holding of a position will not liberate, it can hinder to the extent that it is unconscious and therefore justifies a reaction that modifies the vibration of the energy body. It's a handle that creates this disturbance that brings this illusion of separation, this ongoing perception. The identification with the subject of all thought and circumstance is the trap that relegates would-be seekers to the same inner state as any materialist debating about politics or economics or ideology. The kingdom of heaven is in the midst of you.